Hello and welcome to Prairie Lakes Church. I'm glad to be here. How about you? That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Hey, we are live across Iowa and online this weekend like we are every weekend. And let me just keep you in the loop on something just for a second here as we get going, okay? So if you've been around for frequently for these last few weeks, you may have noticed you're getting a lot of me, okay? And you're welcome, by the way. What a gift I am to you. But hey, where's Pastor John? Where's Pastor Chip? Pastor John, some of you may remember, last year, before last, something like that, had Achilles surgery. And turns out, bummer, it didn't fix everything. So he went back in, and they said, hey, we need to go back in. And they had an opportunity to get the surgery done quickly. So I think he came to me like on a Tuesday, and then and we made this decision, and then by Friday he was getting it fixed. Okay, so he's been down for a few weeks now, a couple weeks. He's on the mend. He's watching. I know he's watching online this weekend. He'll be back here in December. Pastor Chip as well. They'll carry us most of the way to Christmas Eve. But I'm here this weekend. I'm glad that you are here this weekend. We are going to finish a short 2-week series that we've been in here at Prairie Lakes called The Calm in the Storm. Okay? The Calm in the Storm. So here's what we thought. At the time of year that we're in right now, right, post-election, pre-holidays, okay? Which is just, man, there's just plenty of things to be a little on edge about, plenty of things to be anxious about this time of year. Let's just talk about that. Let's just talk about it. And so last week, we talked about this idea of how do you lead yourself well in the storms of life. We used, of course, Jesus as our example. And if I were to sum up what we talked about just last weekend, here's what I would say. I would say we saw that Jesus was able to calm the storm because there wasn't a storm raging inside of him. There just wasn't. Perfectly connected to his Father. So he listened to God before he listened to the storm so that he could speak to the storm rather than the storm speaking to him. And if that sounds like something that maybe you missed that last week, you can go like, I want to know more, but you can always go to prairielakechurch.org and take a listen, okay? Now, okay, that's the idea from last week. It, of course, is easier said than done, yeah? It just is. But listen, just like us, Jesus didn't have this like magic God switch that he just can flip on. Son of God, God in his very nature, he comes to earth. He relinquishes that while he was walking, so he just stays perfectly connected to God. He listens to God first, which allowed him to calm the storm and allow God's power to flow through him. Same thing is available to you and me, okay? Didn't mean that the storms he weathered weren't big. They were. Didn't mean that the storms he weathered weren't real. They were. Big and real storms. But it did mean he could speak to the storm rather than the storm speaking to him, all right? That was last week. With that in mind, let's finish our series this weekend as we go from leading ourselves to now, how do we lead others? And how do we lead others in the storms of life? So here's what I'd like to do as we kind of think about, wrap our minds around that idea. I want to just invite our 7-campus room this morning to reflect on something together. Here's the question. Let's reflect on this one together, okay? I want you to think about the last major challenge that you faced, okay? Think about the last major challenge that you faced. And when you think about that, think about this. Who was the first person that you reached out to for guidance, all right? And then think about why. Why did you choose them? Some of you are going like, I made a real bad decision. Maybe, okay. But nevertheless, when was the last challenge you faced? Major challenge, who'd you reach out to and why? Some of you are in it right now, and you don't need any prompts. You don't need me to kind of help jog your memory. But if you have been lucky enough to be kind of major challenge-free, crisis-free for a little bit, let me maybe help you. Maybe it was a challenge at work, okay? Maybe the last major challenge you faced was a work-related challenge. And something personnel related, you know. Something financial, maybe an organizational change. Or maybe it was a relational challenge. Maybe your son or daughter grew up and they made some decisions that complicated things, or they went in a direction that you wouldn't have gone. And you're facing that one right now. Or maybe a friend did something to no longer make them your friend. Or maybe you lost someone, okay? Maybe it was a relational challenge. Maybe your challenge was more like marital, okay? So maybe there was a conflict, or like a communication thing, an expectation thing. Maybe it was infidelity, and it kind of blew things up. Or maybe you had to face some mental or emotional challenges. Maybe you're walking through something, and it's just hard to get up and face the day, and that's a real thing, just a real thing. I just want you to think about the last challenge that you faced. What was the last challenge, major challenge that you faced? And did you look to someone for guidance? Who was that? Why'd you choose them? As I reflect on this question myself, one of the things I appreciate most about, let's just say 2024, is that it is not 2020, okay? When I think about the last major challenge, I still automatically go back to 2020. 2020 was the year of challenge, right? 20 is the year of crises, and we don't have to hit rewind and play them all back, okay? We don't. But one of the gifts that year of challenges gave me, and maybe this is true for you as well, was this. That year caused me to really look hard for some trusted voices. It just helped me find some people and perspectives that I could trust and lean on to give me some guidance through those storms. In fact, just last week, my wife and I were at dinner with some friends, and this was the topic of conversation. The question was floated, hey, who are you listening to these days? And who are you reading these days? And many of our answers to that question we could trace back to that year of 2020. So I was kind of reflecting on that, and I started to kind of piece together what is more or less a profile of just all of these voices. In other words, like, what do they all have in common? Imagine you ever like watch a crime drama, and then all of a sudden the detective's like in this room, and there's this bulletin board, and there's all these pictures and news articles, and then there's like all these threads that kind of connect them. Just imagine that. I mean, only not criminals, okay? These are trusted voices, but they all seem to have something in common. They all have this like common thread that just kind of characterizes who they are. And as I started to kind of think about that, it reminded me of this. It's kind of a seemingly random verse from 1 Chronicles of all places, okay? 1 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 32 says this, okay? From Issachar, men who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. 200 chiefs with all the relatives under their command. It's kind of a random verse. And this verse appears in a list. And it's one of many lists in the first part of the book of Chronicles. We're going to unpack that just a little bit. But you might know that the Christian Bible, first 39 books of our Bible are basically just the Jewish scriptures. It's the Jewish Bible, but it's the first part of ours. You probably know that. But what you may not know is that the order in our Bible of all of those 39 books, the order in our Bible is different than the Jewish Bible. In our Bible, 1 Chronicles appears kind of in the latter half, or latter part of the first half of those 39 books. But in the Jewish Bible, Chronicles is at the very end. And there's two, because Chronicles is so big that it couldn't just fit on one scroll. So there's the first scroll and there's the second scroll, hence 1 Chronicles and 2 Chronicles. And the reason is that it's at the end of the Jewish Bible is that it's basically a summary. That's what it is. In fact, if you read through the first part of our Old Testament, you get to Chronicles, you're like, I think I've read this before, and that's true. It kind of acts like an index or a summary of Israel's story, start to finish. It starts with Adam's genealogy, and then it goes all the way to Israel's return from exile. But most of the book focuses on King David and his rule and his reign. It just kind of unpacks who this guy is and why he matters so much. And the little verse that we read focuses on a time in his reign that's very similar to the time we're walking through now in the United States. And in this chapter of Israel's story, there is a change in administration. That's what's happening. King David, came from the Israelite tribe of Judah. And he was the second king of Israel. The first king was a man named Saul, who came from a different tribe of Benjamin. And for years, there just wasn't strong agreement among these 12 tribes as to who should be the next king. Sound familiar? Some wanted to remain loyal to Saul and his family line, but others, because this prophet named Samuel had anointed David, said, God has said the next king of our nation should be David. Some of the tribes wanted to switch their loyalties to him. But chapter 12 of 1 Chronicles tells this story of when soldiers from every one of those 12 tribes of Israel start leaking over to David's side. So that's the context, and now I want to read this verse in its context. Here's what's happening in 1 Chronicles 12, okay? There are the numbers of men, these are the numbers of men armed for battle who came to David at Hebron to turn Saul's kingdom over to him, as the Lord had said. From Judah, carrying the shield and the spear, 6,800 armed for battle. From Simeon, the tribe of Simeon, warriors ready for battle, 7,100. From Levi, 4,600, including Jehoiada, leader of the family of Aaron, with 3,700 men, and Zadok, a brave young warrior, with 22 officers from his family. From Benjamin, Saul's tribe, 3,000, most of whom had remained loyal to Saul's house until then. From Ephraim, brave warriors, famous in their own clans, 20,800. From half the tribe of Manasseh, designated by name to come and make David king, 18,000. Then here's our verse, right? From Issachar, men who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. 200 chiefs saw their relatives under their command. From Zebulun, experienced soldiers prepared for battle with every type of weapon to help David with undivided loyalty, 50,000. From Naphtali, 1,000 officers together with 37,000 men carrying shields and spears. From Dan, ready for battle, 28,600. And here's where we're going to end. From Asher, experienced soldiers prepared for battle, 40,000 from the east of the Jordan. From Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, armed with every type of weapon, 120,000. Okay, now maybe we've read of this entire list. Maybe you see why this verse stands out so much. It starts out and ends as a list. From this tribe, this many. From this tribe, this many. From this tribe, this many, right? Until you get to Issachar. Now what you notice is that they don't send thousands and thousands of soldiers. They send a couple hundred leaders. Chiefs who, as the chronicler describes, understood the times and knew what Israel should do. Understood the times, knew what Israel should do. When I think about that bulletin board of voices, trusted voices that I leaned into pretty hard in 2020, these two things seem to be the common thread. Understood the times, and they knew what to do. These are the kinds of people who can lead others in, and even through, whatever storm you're kind of facing. And there's actually a term in the Bible that captures both of these characteristics. The Bible calls people like this, it calls them wise. This is the definition of biblical wisdom. Wise people understand, but not only that, they know what to do with their understanding. They can teach the business class because they can run the company. Now, I've had a chance to, these last few years, travel a little bit and just do some consulting with teams and churches and leaders and stuff like that. And, one of the things they get asked sometimes about that is, you ever want to do that full time? You ever want to travel, just kind of consult full time? And I always respond to that question the same way. I don't know, maybe someday, but not really what I feel called to right now. I feel called to the local church. I feel called to this church. Plus, honestly, I'm afraid that if ever I would to do that, I'd get disconnected from the reality of just real people in real places. What it's like to actually pastor and lead people. I mean, there's a bunch of people smarter than me who do that full time, and they write books and podcasts, and they speak at conferences, and I rely on a lot of those people for wisdom, for sure. But boy, you can tell, can't you? When you're listening to someone talk, you can tell if they know what they're talking about, or they're just talking to hear their own voice, You can tell which of those kinds of people just are talking about ideas or concepts or how things might be or how things can be or how things should be, And you can tell them from the people who have actually tested their ideas in the real world. You can tell the difference between people who sound like they understand and people who actually do understand. Because those people know what to do and they can tell you the stories. I think you can look at it from the other direction as well. Lots of people these days will tell you exactly what you should do. They're not short of prescriptions. But it doesn't seem like they understand, and it doesn't seem like they're listening to you and where you're at. Wise people understand the times and they know what to do. So here's what I'd love to do, okay? I want to just unpack each of these concepts a little bit more deeply and just build out a profile of these wise people, these wise voices. What does it really look like to understand the times and know what to do? And I want to do this because I think, number one, I think it's going to be helpful if you're searching. Are you searching for voices to help you through the storm, okay? These are the kinds of people you want to look for. But also, some of us feel like called to be that voice. Like we're aspiring to be helpful to others in the storm. Use this as your model. Use this as a pattern, okay? All of these are going to be captured and described in God's Word. I want to start on the understanding side. What does it look like to have this kind of biblical understanding? Okay, the first thing is this, and this just seems to be true of all of these people that I end up following along with. They keep the main thing the main thing. They keep the main thing the main thing. First thing I always look at is this. Does this person keep the main thing the main thing? Or do they love to seem to elevate secondary things in order to stir the pot or build a platform or gain a following or be controversial, And just so we're clear about what I mean by the main thing, let's put our eyes on how Jesus defines it. And I know you've heard this probably a million times, but I just don't think we can hear it enough. Here's how Jesus describes the main thing, right? Teacher, which is the greatest commandment and the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. This is the main thing, and there's a second part of the main thing. The second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Right? Jesus says of all the things, and there's a lot of important things, but of all of them, the main thing is loving God and loving your neighbor. There's a lot of other really important things, but nothing as important as that thing. Wise people understand this. They understand it. And when they possess this understanding, here's how you know, because here's how they live. Here's what they do, or in this case, what they don't do. Because they keep the main thing, wise people don't give themselves permission to be unloving. Hey, some of you are chasing after some very unloving voices. And you're drinking pretty deeply from the well of someone who doesn't have a lot of love in their heart. That's not wise. Wise people keep the main thing. They don't give themselves permission to be unloving. I've said something like this before, and either sometimes it's misunderstood, sometimes it's not misunderstood and just doesn't go over well, but I'm going to say it again because I don't learn my lesson. A lot of times I'll get a recommendation from, hey, you need to listen to this sermon, or have you heard of this pastor, or boy, this is a really good podcast, or whatever. Which is great, but a lot of times how the person will describe this recommendation to me is, you're going to like them because they're not afraid to tell the truth. Or I love them because they're not afraid to take a stand. And anytime I hear that, my antenna just go way up. I'll just be honest with you. My suspicion goes way up. Like, oh. In fact, listen, I'm often described as the same way. Here's what we like about you. You're not afraid to tell. You're not afraid to offend people. And I receive that as a compliment, but also I just want to tell you that makes me cringe a little bit. And I get it, but as someone who's himself a little bit more aggressive, one of the more painful lessons that God He continues to teach me is that it's never enough just to be right. It's never enough just to be right. The greatest commandment isn't to be right for God. Or even to take a stand for the truth or say the hard things, right? The greatest commandment is to love. It's to love God and love your neighbor as yourself. That's the main thing. That's the main thing. That's why Paul says to the church in Rome, and he says this to the church in Ephesus. But Rome first. Here's what he says to the church in Rome. He says, let no debt remain outstanding except for the continuing debt to love one another. Whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. And then he writes this to the church in Ephesus, okay? He says, instead, speaking the truth in love will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head. That is Christ. Yeah, you want to speak the truth, but you got to speak it in love because that's what's Christ-like about it. Wise people, okay, if you're looking for a voice to guide you in the storm, wise people, they keep the main thing, and you can tell that that's who they are because they do not give themselves permission to be unloving. They just don't. Here's the next thing that I think wise people, wise voices, people that can lead others in the storm, here's the next thing they understand. They understand that they are citizens in Jesus' kingdom first. Before anything else, Jesus is their Lord. Before anyone else, Jesus is their Lord. Take a look at how Peter describes this kind of wisdom. People who understand they're citizens of Jesus' kingdom and Jesus is their Lord. He says, but even if you should suffer for what's right, you're blessed. Don't fear their threats. Don't be frightened. But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. You see that? See, there's a connection between not fearing and Jesus being your Lord. Right? Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. Okay? But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander, for it is better, if it is God's will, to suffer for doing good than for doing evil, right? Before these people are Americans, before they are Republicans or Democrats or Libertarians or Independents, before these people are white or black or Hispanic or Asian or Baptist or Methodist or Lutheran or Catholic, right? Before anything else, they are citizens of the kingdom with Jesus as their king, as their Lord, which means this, okay? People who have this understanding, here's what they don't do. They don't ever deal in fear. If Jesus is their Lord, they don't deal in fear. You saw that perspective from Peter in the passage we just read. Wise people, people whose voice you can trust in the storm, they don't deal with fear. They're not ignorance is bliss kinds of people, right? But they're not afraid. And they don't make you afraid. Wise people don't make you afraid. They're not rose-colored glasses people, but they're not sky is falling people either. And sometimes wise people will have to turn the temperature up on things. Sometimes they got to turn the urgency up on things. But even when they do it in like a measured and clear and objective kind of way. They just don't stoke panic. There was plenty of real things to be really panicked about in 2020. The trusted voices. They weren't ignorance as bliss people, but man, they just didn't deal in fear. Even if it meant suffering coming their way. Jesus is their Lord, and if Jesus is their Lord, they're going to be fine, and they're going to tell you that you're going to be fine as well. This is how the prophet Isaiah puts this, I think. This is how he talks about it. He says, don't call conspiracy everything this people calls a conspiracy. Don't fear what they fear. Don't dread it. If Jesus is your Lord, man, you just don't deal in conspiracy theories. You don't deal in fear because Jesus is in charge. Even if pain comes your way, they don't have to be afraid. These are the voices that you can trust in the storm, okay? Last understanding that I think these kinds of people have. These are people that you can trust, okay? For these people, they understand that character and integrity matter. Wise people, they understand character and integrity matter. Who you are on the inside matters. And integrity matters, right? Because who you are on the inside should match up with who you are on the outside. Take a look at how the leader of the church in Jerusalem, okay? This is Jesus' half-brother James. Here's how he describes these kinds of people who understand that integrity matters. Who's wise and understanding among you? Let him show up by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. They're humble people, so they'll live this kind of life. They're wise people, so they'll live this kind of life. But if on the inside you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, don't boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom doesn't come down from heaven, but it's earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven, wise people, is first of all pure, then peace-loving and considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. I want you to think about the voices that you listen to, that you feel like are trustworthy in the storm. Does that list describe them? Or are you listening to someone different? Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Listen, so many voices compete for your attention these days. So many voices compete for my attention these days. It's easier than ever for any kind of voice to get through to you. Easier than ever. You have a device in your pocket right now that's speaking to you. But more often than not, those voices are not trying to help you. They're not. What they're trying to do is win you. Win your approval, win your attention, win your vote, win your pocketbook. And while it's unfortunate, it's nevertheless true. Peace doesn't sell. Peace doesn't sell. Being considerate does not inspire a passionate following. Being impartial and merciful is not what TV, radio, or the internet is fueled by. But all of those things are prerequisites for being wise. I thought this was good enough where I think you should write it down. Listen, you can't be wise if you're not good first. Can't be wise if you're not good first. Here's the last thing, okay? If you want to see if someone has this kind of understanding of good character, here's how you can know you can trust their voice. Here's what they do. They're quick to listen, and they're quick to control their tongue, okay? They're quick to listen. They're quick to control their tongue. You can trust people who are careful not only about what they say, but how they say it. Those are wise people. Here's the last couple of verses here, okay? This is James 1:19, 20, and then 26. Here's how James describes it. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongue deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Listen, I'm not sure what kind of storms you're walking into at Thanksgiving here, okay? Hopefully it's just a great time with friends and family around good food. My guess is there's probably going to be a chance for a couple storms to brew. Wouldn't it be great if you were the wise voice around the table? Who might see Jesus in you if you put his wisdom on display? Let me pray for us. Father in heaven, thank you so much for this series. God, I don't know what kind of storms everybody's walking into or walking around or walking out of, but God, we want to be people who are wise. We want to trust people who are wise, and wise in the way that you describe. Help us to accept that challenge, God. Give us the grace we need in order to do it. Jesus, I pray this all in your name. Amen.